Hi everyone and welcome. We're here in my tracking spreadsheet because we're preparing to go downstairs to feed a couple of my red wiggler tubs, and I just wanted to use my spreadsheet to give myself a little bit of an orientation as to where things stand in these tubs, and just to make sure I'm clear on my game plan. So just to quickly summarize, the bin here, the first of the red wiggler tubs, is dating back to 185 days old now, and that's getting up there in age. If you compare it to what I have recorded up here as my longest time, 199 days, we're only 2 weeks away from that. So I'm very interested in not breaking my record. So I'd love to harvest that tub, get all the castings out of there, and get those worms working on a fresh batch soon. So whatever I do today is going to be meant to try to help drive that. And along those same lines, these other two next oldest red wiggler bins, 168 days of age, 154 days of age, have already been set up in such a way that they're geared for migration of the worms. Those two have been set up with horizontal migrations where just one side of the tub was fed, attempting to try to lure the worms out of the other side so that the castings from that other side can be harvested. And those horizontal migrations have been going since back here 28 days ago, 4 weeks ago. Today we set up the first horizontal migration on those tubs, and we've fed them a few times in between. Those columns are hidden up here, can't see those, but on average, on a weekly basis, these bins have all been fed. And for the last 28 days, these two bins here have already been trying to encourage their worms to move to one edge of the bin and vacate the other edge of the bin. This third one, oldest one, we're going to set that up with the horizontal migration as well. I probably should have done that 9 days ago when this bin was last fed, but for whatever reason I did not. However, by the end of today, we're going to have all three of these oldest of my red wiggler bins running in a horizontal migration pattern, driving towards completion so we can harvest their castings. It is springtime. We're going to need those castings for the garden, and besides that, these bins are definitely at a very mature stage, so they're totally ready for this. So let's head on downstairs to the wormery and let's take care of these three red wiggler bins. So seeing here from above, you've got my oldest bin here. This is the one that's 185 days old, and then working your way to the right to bins that are a little bit younger. Even though this is the youngest of these three, this one is extremely advanced. It's got a huge number of worms in it, chowing down whatever gets put into this bin. Very little left as far as residual materials to be broken down in here. Nevertheless, I'm at this point trying to treat all three of these as driving towards completion so we can get the castings out and get the worms in these bins off to a new start in new bins. So let's get these out up onto the table so we can check them out, get some fresh food put in here. So the bins were all laid out here on the table next to each other in the same order that they were up on the shelf. So we'll have this oldest of my bins over here on this far end that we can start with. Now let's see if we can move in a little bit here, get a better view. So here in this plastic tub, we've got the food that they're going to receive, and you can see I've already sort of sectioned it off into three almost equal portions, wrapped up in paper towel. Down here is some potato shavings. Here's some potato shavings that are not wrapped up in a paper towel. Banana peels, obviously, and other things stuck to it. And over here, the base of a head of lettuce, as well as some soup greens. And, oh yeah, down here, a slice of bread for each one. So each one's going to get about the same amount of food. And like I said, in this first one, the feeding that occurred down the middle over here last time is actually going to be relocated, and we're going to put it over there. And if I find any residual food in here, I think I'm going to move it there as well. Try to give them more and more encouragement to exit this this other side, which we would want to start considering as finished compost at this time. And the other staple food item that I always feed is used coffee grounds. It's almost a full container. I'll just use a little bit in each. And last but not least, I have eggshells pulverized into a fine powder, almost tiny particles of eggshell to be used as grit by the worms. So we'll just remove this coffee filter, which I use as just a marker to show where the feeding last occurred. And we'll start moving things aside. Like I said, I'm going to be putting the feeding zone over onto this edge, but since the last feeding occurred right down here in the middle, I want to take a peek at how things look down in there and just get a sense of how things have progressed since we last fed this bin. What I'm already seeing here is the tops of cantaloupe melon. The cantaloupe melon was laid down with the husk side facing up, the meaty portion of it facing down. So we can probably flip any one of these over to get a sense of what's happening right beneath. There's all kinds of worm activity happening right beneath the melon, as one would expect, I suppose. And then if we keep going down a little bit further, I guess we're going to start hitting the bedding that we had laid down right beneath the food items. And since this is the bin that was used for my most recent pumpkin time-lapse video, we've taken the stem of the pumpkin and we've kept it in the bin as a reminder. And as we move a little bit more of the bedding aside, we actually find what remains of the top of the pumpkin itself from that time-lapse video. Getting a little bit moldy, pretty interesting. The outer side of it is not really very much broken down. Clearly identifiable as the pumpkin because of its color still. But this side, where the meaty, fleshy side of the pumpkin was, definitely a different story with a lot of mold growing on it. And despite the fact that there was a pretty good amount of food added to this feeding zone, it still seems like it's a bit drier than it could be. The worms definitely like a more damp environment. And since this is a little bit dry, I'm thinking of remedying that. So let me grab my squirt bottle really quick. I'm not going to go crazy moistening this, but I do want to at least spray it down a little bit, just so that when I cover it up, I don't feel like I'm covering up a dry zone that I've identified here. Now, like I said, I'm not going to reload the food that I've picked out back down into this hole. Because what I want really is I want the worms to start heading to the outer edge of this bin and start treating this as finished compost for the most part. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to kind of bulldoze this far end where I want to move the feeding zones to and bring it over in my direction so that we can set that up for horizontal migration. The material on this side is not quite as dry. It's actually got a pretty good dampness to it. Once we get done here, hopefully the worms will be inclined to work their way over into this edge, and then hopefully within a short period of time they'll be out of this stuff, and then this stuff can actually be used out in the garden. So why don't we just take a little bit of fresh leafy material, lay that down over where we want to have the new feeding zone happening. And since it is a little bit dry, apply a little bit of moisture to that as well. And then we can actually take some of this older bedding material that we found while we were rummaging around and put that down in there as well. And then I'm going to take these pieces of cantaloupe, which have already been broken down pretty good on the meaty side. I'm going to put them down into the feeding zone, but now I'm going to be facing the pieces the other direction. And here's the pumpkin. We'll place that right there in the middle, along with its stem. And these last few pieces of melon. And then I guess we've got a few more things here. Let's see what else we've got. Oh, okay, I thought I had them all. Got a couple more remaining here still. Nope, I think we got them all. Yeah, that's pretty cool. There's another piece. So I'm just going to pick out whatever I can as I go. But I think this is a good foundation for us to drop in the fresh food. Back on the edge. Okay, I think we've got it all. Throw in a little bit of grit. And a sprinkling of coffee on top. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to just gently return some of this material down to a normal level. It's mounted up pretty high over here. And since I scraped all of this leaf cover off the top of the entire bin before, I've got it all sitting here in a big pile in front of me. I think I'm just going to relocate that over and use that as the covering for the new feeding zone. That should make it a little bit easier for us to see it now, but nevertheless, I like to kind of stick to my traditional approach, which is to always cover or to mark the feeding zone where it was with this piece of coffee filter. And besides that, if we're going to be considering this far end over here near me as the finished product, the harvestable castings, then we don't want to have a whole bunch of uneaten leafy matter scattered all over it. We would like it to just be castings. So hopefully this will be a good encouragement for the worms to start making their way over into the new feeding zone on the far edge. And hopefully soon we'll be left on this side with nothing more than castings. So, all right guys, the food's over there. Oh, this is the piece you're eating? Let me move it over there for you. I try to give our worms the encouragement they need to do what we want them to do for us. All right, I think they'll get the idea naturally. I'm just hoping I don't have too much other residual food lingering back here to keep them from doing what I want, which is to move over. There's another piece of pumpkin stem. So let's just give this one quick double check. Oh. Just found another pocket of worms, so I thought I was going to find another hunk of food that they're still working on, but maybe that's already gone. And whatever, we got some bedding materials here too we can move over. Yeah, I guess I should probably mark this in the spreadsheet too, that the horizontal migration only started today. And keep our fingers crossed, because I'd really like for this bin to be harvested prior to 2 weeks from now, because if we go any longer, this will ultimately turn into my oldest bin ever. Which isn't the end of the world. Who knows? Maybe those 2 bins will actually be ready for harvest even before this one. This bin, you know, with its special assignment being in the tiny pumpkin time lapse, you know, it gets a special pass if it needs to go longer and become the longest bin ever. Now this bin, as you can see, is already set up with the horizontal migration feeding pattern. So the worms are already being encouraged to come over to this side. So we're going to see how that encouragement is progressing. It's been a couple feedings now since only this far edge has been receiving food. So you'd have to go back quite a number of weeks at this point to the point where this middle section was last fed. So it shouldn't be too surprising to find that this far edge is where all of our worms are hanging out by this time. And hopefully that also means that the material over on this edge is getting close to being depopulated. I'm just going to do a quick little pick through here just to see what I can see. I mean, compared to what you see here, which is worms pretty much everywhere, I've got to dig down pretty far to the very bottom almost, where it's nice and moist and cool, to start finding some worms. Hopefully they'll get hungry soon, or curious, and want to start roaming around and make their way over with the rest of their cousins into the active feeding zone. But there's not much else you can do other than give them time to pretty much deplete all of the food supplies in the old material before they go rummaging around for something new. So there is probably some fair amounts of food items in here. Is anything I find I could just toss over there? And I suppose it doesn't hurt either that I'm sort of aerating this material a little bit, so that that really comfortable, moist section that they're enjoying right now, I can kind of move that up, give that stuff a chance to aerate a little bit, dry out, and maybe become a little bit less appealing for the worms to hang out in, and go start looking for something a little bit better, make their way into the new feeding zone. Okay, I think we've more or less fluffed up the majority of this finished castings material. And we did find a couple bits and pieces that we've been able to move over into the new feeding zone. All hopefully good things that will help encourage the worms to depopulate this material. Okay, so back to the feeding zone here. Just like the other bins got, here we've got some cantaloupe rinds, much more broken down. Far further progress on this than in the other bin. Here, mango seed, a whole bunch of worms hanging out inside eating the mango seed. Yummy, yummy. And I guess remnants of other feedings in here. Stuff like a piece of cardboard, piece of egg carton, bedding, and other food items that are all kind of becoming mush over time here. Turning it all into wonderful castings. Okay, so if you've been following along, you'll notice that I do sort of have a method here, which is to try to position all that newest food as far out as possible, so that hopefully it doesn't, end up becoming leftovers commingled with the finished castings. Try to keep the newest of the feedings off to the furthest reaches of the bin, and hopefully that means the past couple other horizontal feedings that they received back this way are a little bit further broken down than what's all the way out here on the edge. So let's see, I'm thinking recycling some of these leaves here, because we just want to have a little splash of bedding on the bottom, I think, of our new feeding. I think that would still leave us with enough material here that we can cover up with. So we'll grab the next batch of food, again, paper towel, wrapped pile of potato skins, a banana peel, some soup greens, a hunk of lettuce, a slice of bread, and a variety of other little loose items dropped on top. It's already got a whole pile of worms right on the edge there, so they're going to be able to jump on that 1, 2, 3. Sprinkle the top with a little bit of coffee, trying to save the last remnants of that for the last bin, so they get a little bit too. And that's about where we're at. All right, let's begin moving the stuff on the edge back over to cover up this feeding zone. Okay. And we could just use this remaining leaf cover to get it all covered up there. All right, looking pretty good. So, keeping my fingers crossed. Would love to harvest this batch soon. So hopefully the worms will help me get to that point. This is a banana stem. You can see how it starts to look after they really start breaking it down nicely. Okay. Cover up and feed the last bin. Okay. The same story here. We're covering up where the last feeding occurred using coffee filters. And what's over on this side is what you would like to think is getting to the finished castings stage, with this far edge having been fed perhaps 3 times at this point, trying to encourage the worms to come over to this side and to exit the finished castings on this side. So this bin is a little bit more full, a little bit more damp. It's got a lot more weight to it, that's for sure. But before we take care of the feeding over there, let's do the same as we did in the last bin, which is just to try to give the finished castings a little bit of a stir. Give us a chance to examine how the stuff is looking. Pick out any large food chunks that might still be remaining in it. And maybe aerate a little bit as well, which always helps. You see, this stuff's got tons and tons of worms in it. It could take some time before they're inspired to move out of this material, because it does seem pretty cozy. Nice moisture to it, and you know, you don't have to go far to find a remnant of food still sitting there ready for the taking for them to eat. So who knows, I might just be looking at a couple record breakers here in terms of my oldest bins ever. If that's what it needs to be, then so be it. Gotta give the worms time to break down all of the material and to move out. Lots and lots of worms in this bin. With this bin especially, with the number of worms scattered throughout it, sometimes I do wonder if maybe I've got to try to help a little bit, you know, to really give some of the worms that are already on this far edge, give them a new home and relocate them, and then give the worms that are still occupying this old stuff a new place to roam into. And at that same time, giving this stuff the amount of time that it needs to get broken down completely and depopulated. So as I go really deep, I can feel the moisture down there. The material feels really cozy for the worms, nice and damp. So it's not surprising that there's a whole bunch of worms everywhere. This piece right here, I just wanted to really point out. It's a half a lime. You know, a lot of times you hear don't feed your worm bins citrus. In this case, look at that. Worms really digging it. So I think, you know, a piece of citrus, given enough time, becomes a tempting morsel for the worms. It might just need a little bit extra time for the unfriendlier chemical components of it to maybe break down with the help of other creatures in your bin, I suppose. And then the worms will eventually take a shine to it too. So wow, this has just always been such a really, really impressive bin. It's always just had so many worms in it. It's always had such incredible capability to break down large amounts of waste. And I think it is kind of an example of what I like my worm bins to be like, generally speaking. So that was fun, but we're burning a lot of time here. So let's let's get back on track here. We're going to try to level this off a little bit now that it's been aerated a little, and get back to checking out how this feeding zone is progressing. I guess we'll do the same here too. We'll just move the leaf cover that's topping it off to the side. Maybe use a little bit of it as bedding for the new feeding, and then use what remains to cover up with. So once again, I'm just looking to make some space on the far edge. And we're already starting to encounter some of the previous food items. Another no-no food, pineapple. Maybe a little bit acidic in the beginning, but given time it should be fine for the worms. And here we're not really picking through the old feeding to disturb the worms like we did last time. Here we're just going to create this opening so we can get the last batch of food in here for these guys and let them all return to work. Alright, like I said, I'm going to grab some of this leafy material here. We pulled off the top, lay it down as a little bit of a bedding on the bottom. And then what remains of our food allocated for today is all for these guys. So we'll just dump it right in. Make sure we give them everything. So here we've got the potato. No piece of paper towel wrapping this one, just a couple cabbage leaves wrapping it up. Here too, a banana peel, a hunk of lettuce, some soup greens, and a slice of bread. A nice consistent feeding for all three of these oldest of my red wiggler bins. Looks like I spilled a little bit. Oops. Okay. This looks really nice. Always love poking around inside this bin. Can only hope to always have at least one bin with the capability that this bin has, because this bin is just phenomenal. Since it is so heavy, it's going to have a lot of castings. Okay, I'm just going to begin leveling things off. Maybe I'll move this mango pit closer to where the food is. Although here, while I'm pressing down onto the old feeding, I could certainly tell there's still a fair amount of old food from the last feeding still present in here. Very mushy, the majority of it. But I think we're just going to leave it be. I don't feel like picking around through it. I think we're pretty much done here. Let's see what else we can scrape off the top here and get it back over to cover up the food. Yeah, looks pretty good. So I've still got a little bit of work left to do here, cover things up and clean things up, but I won't keep you around for that because that's boring. We'll leave it at that. So I've got my 3 oldest red wiggler bins fed. I appreciate you keeping me company. Thanks for sticking around and watching my video. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate that. That's always really appreciated. Also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel as well. That's really appreciated too. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.